Two infants, one river, one basket. At first, the stories look almost identical. A child is hidden, sealed away, surrendered to water, rescued by power. But then something changes. One child grows up to build the first empire, the other grows up to break one. And once you see that contrast, you start to realize this was never just about two men. It was about two operating systems for civilization. Let's start with the image itself, because images outlive facts. Sargon of Akkad, the king who rose from obscurity to dominate Mesopotamia. Moses, the Hebrew child marked for death, then drawn out of the Nile into the house of Pharaoh. Both are wrapped in danger before they can speak. Both are carried by a river before they can walk. Both emerge from the margins into history. And that is exactly why the comparison is so powerful. Not because the stories are identical, they are not, but because they use the same symbolic machine: the abandoned child, the hidden origin, the chosen survivor. Civilizations keep returning to that pattern for one reason: it turns power into destiny. But here's the part no one talks about. Sargon and Moses use that pattern for opposite ends. Sargon's legend is the story of ascent. The child is born in secrecy, placed in a basket of reeds, sealed with bitumen, set on the river. He is found, raised, favored, elevated. The message is subtle but brutal. Even if the king begins in shame, the gods already selected him. His survival becomes proof of his right to rule. His weakness becomes propaganda for future dominance. And this is where it gets strange. Modern systems love the outsider myth, the founder from nowhere, the disruptive genius, the self-made ruler who just happened to be chosen by history. But in Sargon's version, the hidden child does not challenge empire. He becomes empire that changes everything. Moses begins with the same visual grammar, but a different moral universe. He too is hidden. He too is placed in a reed basket. He too is carried by a river and pulled into the machinery of power. But Moses is not rescued so he can inherit the empire's logic. He is rescued inside the palace so he can one day expose it. That is the reversal. Sargon's river story legitimizes the throne. Moses' river story infiltrates it. At first, Moses looks like another chosen court child, but then he becomes a fracture in the house that raised him. And suddenly the basket is not a coronation device, it is a smuggling device, a future threat delivered directly into the center of power. So which story came first? That is where scholars and internet arguments collide. Yes, the surviving Sargon birth text is often pointed to because of its striking similarity to Exodus. Yes, the parallel is too obvious to ignore. But surviving texts are not the same thing as simple literary theft. The version of Sargon's birth legend we actually possess is preserved in much later Neo-Assyrian copies, and Moses himself sits inside a tradition whose dating and composition are fiercely debated. So the real question is not, who copied whom? Why does legitimacy so often begin with exposure, danger, abandonment, water? Because power needs more than force. It needs mythic permission. Now we reach the hidden system. These are not just birth stories, they are software updates for authority. Sargon tells the world, the ruler may come from below, but his rise was destined. Moses tells the world the system may look eternal, but it can be judged from within. One narrative sacralizes conquest, the other sacralizes liberation. And that split still defines politics now. Every institution on earth leans, consciously or not, toward one of these two myths. Does it frame power as necessary because it wins? Or does it frame power as accountable because it crushes? That is the real Sargon versus Moses debate. Not ancient biography, civilizational programming. Psychologically, both figures answer the same human terror. What if I was thrown into a world that did not want me? What if I survived for a reason? That is why these stories stick. The river is not just a river, it is chaos. History, abandonment, the unconscious itself. The basket is the fragile self. Sargon resolves that anxiety by saying survive, rise, dominate. Moses resolves it by saying survive, awaken, confront. One becomes armored ambition. The other becomes moral burden. And this is where it gets personal. Most people think they want the Sargon outcome: status, victory, recognition. But deep down, many are living the Moses pattern, trapped inside systems they did not build, wondering whether comfort is costing them truth. But let's raise the stakes. Sargon wins fast. He consolidates, conquers, centralizes. His story is clean because empire prefers clean stories. One ruler, one line of destiny, one expanding order. Moses is messier. He hesitates, he flees, he argues, he returns reluctantly. He does not simply take a throne, he destabilizes the entire symbolic order of Egypt. That makes Moses harder for modern systems to market. Corporations love visionaries who scale, states love founders who unify, algorithms love decisive winners, but a figure who exposes the moral cost? That is dangerous. Now bring this into the present. The Sargon archetype appears whenever power tells you expansion is salvation. Scale is treated like virtue. Control is framed as stability. Not always with whips and pyramids, sometimes with debt, addiction, surveillance, distraction, and engineered dependence. At first, the system feels protective. It educates you, employs you, entertains you. Then something changes. Sometimes with debt, addiction, surveillance, and engineered dependence. You realize the palace that saved you may also be shaping you. Were you rescued to belong or to see through it? And here's the most unsettling twist. Both myths can be abused. Sargon can justify domination by dressing ambition in destiny. Moses can be weaponized by any movement that wants to imagine itself morally pure while seeking power of its own. That means the real danger is not the story itself, it is the ego that enters the story. Give a narcissist the Sargon pattern and he becomes untouchable. Give a fanatic the Moses pattern and he becomes righteous beyond criticism. Discernment matters more than inspiration. You are not awakened merely because you feel chosen. Chosen by what? For what? Toward domination or toward responsibility? That is the dividing line. So, Sargon versus Moses. The empire builder versus the empire breaker. The child preserved for rulership versus the child preserved for confrontation. Both survive the water. But survival alone means nothing. What matters is what survival teaches you to worship. Order at any cost, or freedom with responsibility, allegiance to a law above victory. And notice something else. Sargon's story ends in vertical power. Everything rises toward the throne. Moses' story moves horizontally. A people, a law, a covenant. One is centralized glory. The other is collective transformation through ordeal. That difference matters now more than ever. One feed, one intelligence, one integrated order. That is pure Sargon energy, efficient, totalizing. But Moses introduces a terrifying counterpoint. What if the way out is slower, harsher, and less glamorous than the system's promise? That is why this ancient comparison is not ancient at all. It is about founders, whistleblowers, rebels, CEOs, prophets, states, platforms, and you. Everyone arrives at the river. Everyone is carried by forces they did not choose, and everyone faces the same decision. Will I turn my survival into domination or into responsibility? Will I call the system sacred because it fed me? Or will I judge it by what it does to the weak? One justifies power. The other teaches how conscience confronts it. So no, the real question was never simply whether Moses was based on Sargon. That question is too small. The larger truth is darker and more useful. Human beings keep inventing river children because power is never satisfied with force alone. It needs a sacred origin. It needs a wound. It needs a miracle of survival. It needs a story that makes rule feel inevitable or resistance feel holy. Sargon and Moses are two answers to the same ancient problem. How do you turn survival into authority? One answer says, conquer the world that almost killed you. The other says, return to the world that raised you and judge it. And maybe that is the line that matters most. Because the most dangerous people are not the ones who survive chaos. They are the ones who never ask what chaos made them become. Look at the river, look at the basket, ask the question,